Our scripture reading for today comes from the ever-popular prophet of Habakkuk. I know, that name just rolls off the tongue. I'm sure you have all, it's only 3 chapters, so you probably all have it memorized. But, no, I joke because I know it's not used a lot. There's a lot of little short things in here that are so fascinating, but we almost never get to them. My personal favorite thing about this particular one, about Habakkuk, is that he hits like multiple different genres in rapid succession, which is fun as someone trying to pick it apart and figure out what's there. So I at least had a lot of fun trying to figure out where to go with this. I hope you all enjoy the scattered nature of what I came up with. But I did extend it a little bit. The lectionary is 1 through 4 and 2 1 through 4, which stops conveniently where the text starts getting a little uncomfortable, and I'm sorry, but I'm ruthless. I can't do that. So I continued on a little bit to finish off the list that he had going. So we will start with 1 through 4. The oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not listen? Or cry to you, violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack, and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, judgment comes forth perverted. Continuing in chapter 2. I will stand at my watchpost and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. Moreover, wealth is treacherous. The arrogant do not endure. They open their throats wide as Sheol. Like death, they never have enough. They gather all nations for themselves and collect all peoples as their own. Shall not everyone taunt such people, and with mocking riddles say about them, alas, for you who heap up what is not your own. How long will you load yourselves with goods taken in pledge? Will not your own creditors suddenly rise, and those who make you tremble wake up? Then you will be booty for them. Because you have plundered many nations, all that survive of the peoples shall plunder you. Because of human bloodshed and violence to the earth, to cities and all who live in them, alas for you who get evil gain for your house, setting your nest on high to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house. By cutting off many peoples, you have forfeited your life. All right, nice uplifting reading. Yeah. So, when it comes to Habakkuk, he starts off with lament. We talked about that a little while back, this complaint to God, which is fun, because there's not a lot of, most of the prophets are confronting the people, right? Look at all of you people doing terrible things, ha. He goes straight to God. God, I'm pretty sure you're not a fan of all the horrible things going on, so where are you? Huh? Right? He complains. That's chapter 1. And from the complaint, the timing on this probably puts him as a relative contemporary of Jeremiah. So he's likely referring again to the Babylonians. There's a lot of that in there. And it's unclear whether he's watching Babylon, right, come in, taking everything up and seeing themselves about to get swept up in the wave, and he's kind of saying, you're going to regret this. Or if it's written kind of from a past perspective, but if it's being written while in Babylon, right, we see them coming, we know this is happening because we've experienced it, and then in 2, he's moving forward into look, it's going to get better. The same kind of thing Jeremiah does. There is a lament. There's these terrible things happening. God, where are you? And God responds, just wait. A little longer than you maybe want to, but just hold on. So we get this reference to the Chaldeans, which is this period of Babylon. We know probably addressing that. And then begins with lamentation before turning straight up apocalyptic, right? This whole, the day is coming when all of this will be fixed. This is a whole genre of literature in the Near East, particularly in Canaanite and Hebraic texts. You get a bunch of this in Daniel too, right? Where we have this habit of thinking about it as apocalypse, meaning end of the world per se, but largely the texts aren't looking that far out. They're saying there's an end to this. And they're usually written in times where this is really bad. There's an end here to Babylon. And it frankly doesn't take that long for that end to come. Well, okay, 70 years is a long time. But in the scope of human history, not that long. So, when it comes to talking about the particular accusations that are made against Babylon and others, there's two linguistic things we need to cover here. Hebrew and Greek, which are the languages that the Bible is written in, do not compare very nicely to English, believe it or not, because the modern language that we speak didn't even exist when these languages were being used and written. So, translation is always kind of a messy art, and part of that is word choice. Because especially Hebrew, anybody here know anything in terms of Hebrew? Hebrew is frustrating as someone who likes to read things in original language, because Hebrew words all mean a lot of things, right? Unlike English, which has an incredible volume of words with moderately specific meanings, Hebrew likes to use the same word for lots of different things. And so, for instance, there's no word to say that you're angry. You say someone's on fire, which could be a problematic miscommunication. But hypothetically, people know what's going on. There's no way to say someone's patient. You say they have a long nose. There's no separate word for strong. You say they're handsy. You say they have big hands for strong. So there's tons, and they use a system. The technical term is triliterate roots, but there's 3 consonants, and based on the vowels you plop in, it means different things. So it's messy. And the added problem is then, when you're trying to translate that, there's conceptual differences too, and there's 2 that I think are important here. The first one is the difference between righteousness and justice. Would most of you say those are relatively distinct ideas, right? We think of those, at least usually, as relatively distinct concepts. It is the same word. The same word gets translated both ways, oftentimes in both Greek and Hebrew. And there are a few different words that can be rendered as those, but 100% in Greek, justice and righteousness are exactly the same word. And most of the time in Hebrew, if you do a word search for the words being used in this text translated as righteousness, many, many other places in Scripture that same word is being translated as justice, because the concepts are interchangeable in these ancient languages. They don't distinguish between behaving properly in respect to God and kind of the higher understanding of the world, and behaving properly with respect to our communities and those around us in the world. That is the same thing. It's just being good. So, anytime you see the word righteous, feel free to plop in the word just or justice and righteousness instead of just. Feel free to flop them around and see if it makes it interesting, if it gives you a different insight into what's going on in the text, because the words are interchangeable, as frustrating as that may be for us. And to make it worse, there's another word, chamas, that shows up in here, and it's violence, right? At the beginning, it's violence, Well, that word means physical violence, but it also means any kind of generic wrongdoing against a person. So it means as much to go up and stab somebody as it means to go up and steal their wallet, as it means to go up and give them a really horrible insult that they're going to think about for the next 15 years in therapy. Right? Those are all forms of harm, and the word just generically means harm in sort of the abstract sense. So once again, the bar changes because we differentiate strongly between those things, and it's the same word. And I'm not saying they didn't. There's clearly ways that they make this specific in law and whatnot. I'm not saying that they don't have a way to differentiate these things. I'm just saying the words that we are given are very broad, and then we get to play around with interpreting that as to, well, what that means. I had my professor that I learned Hebrew from in seminary had this great saying where if the biblical authors ever had the option between writing something in a very clear and precise way and writing something in a very broad way that could be interpreted with a plurality of different meanings, they always chose the latter. There is no desire to make this clear and easy to understand. They want us to struggle with it and think about it and work through it and go through all of the possibilities. We worship very much a God of the possible. Oy vey. So, it's a good thing, but it's a frustrating thing, right? Because if you want clear answers, you're in trouble. Sorry. We get a mess, and we get to play in the mess. We're kids in a puddle, okay? It's a lot of fun. You get something done, but yeah, there's a mess along the way. So, we are going to go down the list real quick. The first condemnation, the first people in chapter 2, when God is responding, that are mentioned are the proud, right? Those proud people. And we've mentioned pride before. I feel like that came up last week vaguely. But the word in Hebrew, and I love this, the word in Hebrew for proud, or the way that it's worded in here at least, in this particular instance, means to be bent. Because from this angle, I can only see myself. That's not true. Out of the very corners of my eyes, I can get a little bit. But the idea of being proud, literally by the word, once again, if you're angry, you're on fire. Well, if you're proud, you're bent in such a way that you're only seeing yourself. So pride isn't sort of the colloquial use of just, hey, I did something well, yay. It's specifically the sort of self-centered concept that ceases to worry about other people and ceases to recognize the contributions of other people and instead is about me. So those are the first people that get decried here, and apparently it's not going to go well for them. The next group is wealthy. I feel like that came up last week too. It's almost like these themes show up in multiple places in the Bible because they're a consistent thing that God worries about. And in here, it is largely about wealth more than anything else, which is why I think it's funny that the reading was set to stop at 4, right before you get to like 6 straight verses about wealth and whatnot. Huh? But in this case, we get this idea of piling up things it specifies that are not your own, which is what Babylon's doing, right? They're wandering their way through the lands, conquering everyone, taking off all their gold and stuff and dragging it back, taking off all their people and dragging it back. But it also harkens to other ideas. like the Jubilee, if you ever want a really radical vision for what God would like us to look like in sort of a material sense, look at Leviticus 25. And I kind of feel weird recommending people reading Leviticus at all. But there's this whole thing where every 49 years, everybody resets, right? Every family has its set kind of plot, because remember, they're defined by families more than individuals. In the ancient world, the individual was was defined largely in part of a group. We tend to do it the other way. But in the Jubilee, every family went back to their land. So if you had sold chunks of that, or you had lost chunks of that, boop, all back. Slaves would go free, and all debts were canceled. Everybody gets a complete economic reset every 49 years, because that was theirs. There's also a whole bunch of stuff about getting back your things in between and whatnot, but there's this fundamental idea that justice in the generic sense about what belongs to people, what deserves, is relatively consistent. Everybody should have their enough. And any time that is violated, we are acting unjustly. We are causing harm. So which is what shows up again and again in the Old and New Testament, that accumulating too much stuff, sort of by definition, means it's being deprived from other people, and everyone should have enough. Next on there, this is also a wealth thing, but there's this whole thing about charging interest and credit. People gather that. Do you know that it was illegal for them to charge interest on loans? Like, the Bible forbids charging interest. And in fact, that was carried through into the Roman Catholic Church up until more or less the Reformation. Interest was illegal. You could make a loan and say, I'm going to lend you $1,000, you have to pay me back $1,100. There was ways around it. There's fees and whatever, exchanges. But the idea was, you don't use complicated math. And, how good are all of you at calculating interest on loans? Right? I mean, maybe you had to do it sometimes, but I'm going to bet most people would struggle to sit down, and if you take out a loan at this interest rate for this many years that compounds like this, like figuring out how much that, most of us would struggle to do that. And if you're talking especially about a culture in the ancient world where like 3% of the population was literate, charging interest on loans is an unfair practice in the text eyes, because it suckers people into giving up a whole lot of their stuff that they otherwise wouldn't, without understanding how much they're giving up. And just look at education loans. I graduated from Cannon here in 2005, and I went to college because I wanted to do stuff that required education. And I had been encouraged to do that my whole life because I was pretty academically inclined. Now, I conveniently didn't have to take out a lot of loans, but a lot of people I know were. You know who doesn't understand compounding interest? 18-year-olds straight out of high school trying to figure out what to do with their lives, who have been told to take out tens of thousands of dollars of compounding interest loans, right? So, whether or not it's fair or appropriate, repeatedly, Scripture says, look, you just can't do it. Is wrong to set up an interest system that people can't understand to trick people out of their money. Whether or not they agree to it, it's unfair to do. So we go from people, we went from the proud to the wealthy to those who charge interest. And then we get a beautiful line about violence against the land itself. I know a lot of people who think this concern with the environment is a relatively modern thing, but it's not. There's laws in here that prohibit armies from chopping down orchards, fruit-bearing orchards. Because, you know how long it takes for a fruit tree to start producing fruit? Long time. So if you are successful at taking that city and you've chopped down those trees to make arrows or siege engines or fires or whatever else, well, now you're going to have to wait so long, even if you replant them, to get it back. And if you fail, well, now there's a whole bunch of people just starving because they don't have the food. I'm even going to go back. How many, I don't know if people are familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's this ancient Mesopotamian story. It predates all of, it is super, super ancient. We're going to go with that. We're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of 2700 BCE. So, there's this hero, great fighter, king of a city. He has his friend Enkidu. They go off because they need timber for, I don't remember, it's been a while, but they need to chop down a bunch of trees for timber to build stuff. And they go there and they slay the giant that's protecting this forest, and then they clear cut the whole forest. And as they're dragging it back, there's this whole section where Enkidu, Gilgamesh's friend, is like, the gods are going to be really mad about this because we needed some, but we took it all, and that whole forest is gone, and that's going to be bad. They understood way back then that we are, in fact, dependent in a variety of ways upon the land. And so God's wrath comes down on those who destroy the land as well as the people. And then we get this one at the end where I stopped. And you can always keep going forever, but it felt like a reasonable conclusion. The language changes after 10. But those at the end, we see those who put their houses on high. Which, all right, let you mull over that one for a second. God doesn't apparently like people putting their houses up on high places. Okay. What do you put up on high places? Well, mostly very expensive fortified structures, away from other things, especially in this context, right? This is where your citadels go. This is where your castles go. This is where your rich estates are put, high up away, so that when the invading army comes and they burn the city down below, the stuff up top, that's still okay. Good for you. The point being made in this is that we have to all be safe together. We do not get to consider that lower city expendable to protect our place up high. And you ever hear this constant refrain about the high places being torn down? Yeah, well, that's because the high places are where the people that thought everybody else might be expendable put their places. That's apparently not okay either. So, here are the list of complaints that Habakkuk takes. This is what God is responding to, saying, these are the things that are problems. And the day is coming when we're going to rectify all this, and the people guilty of these things are probably not going to be happy about it. Now, I have a feeling a lot of this stuff applies to us too. You know what? I don't want to build my house in a floodplain. You know what? I worry about my life sometimes first and then help other people out. I have money. We talked about this last week. You know, how extreme do we need to get? How much does God really need for us to give? And I don't have a comfortable answer for any of you because it looks like a lot. But I will say this, if it helps you feel any better, the complaints exist in here because they weren't very good at it back then either. We didn't go from some idyllic age where everybody shared and took care of each other to a place where we wantonly attack each other and do these things. It wasn't good then and got bad. That's why these texts exist. I cannot talk today. But I would be careful how much comfort you take in that, because it seems that God still has this vision for us in life where we share, where we live together rather than protecting ourselves at others' expense, where we don't trick people into benefiting us and harming them, where we don't focus so much on ourselves and turn inward that we can't see other people, where we don't destroy the land around us for our own benefit, All of these things, God's pretty clear, it's gonna bite us in the butt eventually. And I am all about forgiveness, as is God, as is clear if you read this. But the problem with, no, I definitely don't want to word it that way. The struggle with forgiveness is then trying to do things differently. I have small children, and I can make them say I'm sorry, but it's really hard to make them do it different. And like it or not, we're all children to God. So, by all means, struggle. Be uncomfortable. Deal with the fact that there are grand expectations on us. And know that you're not probably going to get it right most of the time. That's what forgiveness is there for. But what we are not forgiven for is not even trying. We gotta. God has desires for this world. The day is coming, God repeatedly says, when this is a world that he wants to enter again. And look at all of us and say, well done, good and faithful servants. So, I look forward to that day, understanding that I have not measured up, but I have tried. And I hope all of you can say the same. And I hope all of you feel encouraged and empowered to envision a world like God does. And together, hopefully, we can help that happen. Amen.